Brett and Tiffany, a love story, written by Barron Darby, a Books by Barron production, for every couple who proved that the quiet love is the loudest. Chapter 1. The Artist. I've never been the loudest person in the room. It's a weird thing to say when you're about to tell your love story on a platform that millions of people watched. But it's true. I've always been the guy in the corner, observing, taking things in, processing before I speak. Some people read that as reserved or distant. The crew on Love is Blind looked at me like they wanted to give me a hug after my fiancé fell asleep on me mid-conversation. But I've been this way since I was a kid in North Carolina, sitting in my room drawing while the world happened outside. I was born in Wilmington, North Carolina, same hometown as Michael Jordan, which is a fact I've been trotting out my whole life, because if you grow up in Wilmington and you don't claim Mike, what are you even doing? We didn't stay there my whole childhood. We moved around a bit, eventually landing in Raleigh, where I'd do most of my growing up. But Wilmington is in my blood. It's that Eastern Carolina pace, hot summers, slow drawl. People who speak when they have something to say and keep to themselves when they don't. Down there, the men in my family didn't sit you down for heart-to-hearts. They taught you things sideways. You'd be standing next to your uncle while he worked on a car, and somewhere in that silence, he'd drop a whole philosophy on you in one sentence and then go back to the engine. That's the kind of man I was raised by, economical with words, heavy on presence. You earned every compliment by doing, not asking. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. That's not a sob story. It's just the truth. I was the kid who was different in ways that didn't make sense to other kids. While everybody else was outside playing, I was inside sketching, building worlds in my sketchbook that made more sense to me than the one I was actually living in. Art was my language, before I had words for the things I felt. When you're a kid and you don't quite fit, you either force yourself into a shape that the world accepts, or you create your own world. I chose the second option. My family didn't talk about feelings much. That's another thing I want to be honest about, because it matters for everything that comes later. We're a tight family, love each other deeply, would show up for each other in a heartbeat. But the words, the actual verbal expression of love, of how you feel about someone, of what they mean to you, that just wasn't how we operated. My dad, my mom, my brother, we communicated through presence, through action, through showing up, not through saying it. I didn't realize how much that shaped me until much later, until I met a woman who needed to hear the words as much as she needed to feel them. I studied digital animation at Living Arts College because the drawing thing wasn't just a hobby. It was the only thing that ever made complete sense to me. I could sit at a desk for 12 hours building a 3D model, and it would feel like 20 minutes. That focus, that ability to disappear into creative work, it's a gift, and it's a curse. It means I can make beautiful things. It also means I can go to places inside my own head that are hard for other people to follow me into. After school, I got a job at Electronic Arts in Durham. Video games. Spent years in that world, a decade actually. Working as a 3D artist, designer, producer. I worked on projects that millions of people played, and nobody knew my name. And that was fine. I liked being behind the scenes. I liked making the thing without needing to be the thing. I've said this before and I'll say it again. It's about talent and drive. It's about being the kind of person who sees a door that wasn't built for him and builds his own. I don't have a 4-year degree. I have a portfolio. I have skills. I have a decade of shipped work. In this industry, that's what counts. But somewhere in that decade, something shifted. I started looking at footwear design the way I used to look at animation, with that same obsessive curiosity, that same itch to understand how a thing gets made from nothing. Sneakers had always been a part of my identity. Ask anyone who knows me. The shoe collection is real. It's extensive. It's possibly a problem depending on who you ask. And Tiffany has opinions. Jordan ones, Huaraches. I wear sunglasses more than most grown men should. I have preferences and I commit to them. I followed that curiosity to Nike, moved to Beaverton, Oregon in 2018 to take a position that most people thought was a weird pivot. Video games to footwear. But that's how I've always been. I don't plan my life in straight lines. I follow the thing that interests me. I give it everything I've got, and I see where it goes. Footwear design. Video games before that. A screenplay now, which I'm not going to talk about yet because I'm not at a point where I feel like it's something I'd actually want to share. But yeah, I'm a creative person. That's the through line. Whether it's pixels or polymers or paragraphs, I'm making something. Portland became home. Not immediately. It took time. It's a small city. Everybody knows everybody. The culture is different from the East Coast, different from anything I'd experienced. But I liked it. I liked the quiet of it. The craft beer and the coffee shops and the way people here actually slow down enough to pay attention to things. There's something else, though. Something I need to tell you before we go any further, because it explains a lot about how I move through the world and how I showed up in those pods. My brother passed away. Unexpectedly. He was engaged. The family was supposed to be getting together for a wedding, and instead, we got together for a funeral. I'm not going to unpack all of that here, because some of it is still mine, and some of it belongs to people I love who didn't sign up for a book. But I'll tell you what it did to me. It made me extremely aware of how short life is. Extremely aware that the time you think you have isn't guaranteed, that the things you're putting off, the conversations, the commitments, the leaps of faith, those can't wait forever because forever isn't promised. That awareness lives in me every single day. It motivated me to not waste time, but it also made me hesitant. Because when you understand how much a single decision can alter everything, you start weighing those decisions very carefully. You become intentional. You become deliberate. You become the kind of person who sits in silence for a while before he speaks, because the words matter too much to throw around carelessly. That's who I was when Love is Blind came calling. A man who had built a career he loved, who lived in a city he was still getting to know, who had lost someone who taught him that life doesn't wait for you to be ready. A man who was dating with intention, who had a purpose, who wasn't interested in games or timelines or performing for cameras. A man who was ready, even if he didn't know how to say it out loud yet. Chapter 2. The Layoff. Before any of it happened, before the pods, before Tiffany, before any of you knew my name, I got laid off. electronic arts, the place I'd poured a decade of my life into. I'd done good work there, shipped games, built a career. And one Tuesday, like it happens to thousands of people in tech every year, they called me into a room and told me I was part of a cost reduction. Thanks for your service. Clean out your desk. Here's a severance. Goodbye. I'm not going to pretend I handled it gracefully. I didn't. A decade is a decade. You don't just shrug that off. I went home that night and sat in my apartment and tried to figure out what the next version of my life was supposed to look like. The girlfriend I had at the time didn't handle it well. That's the honest version. When the paycheck stops and the identity wobbles, you learn a lot about who's actually with you. I've told this story a couple of times in interviews because I think it's useful for other men to hear. A lot of us build our sense of worth around the job, and then we find partners who also build our worth around the job. And then when the job disappears, everybody panics at the same time. That's what happened. She panicked. I was already panicking. Nobody was holding the rope. So I left, not dramatically. I just packed a bag and went to Miami for a while. Reset, sat on the water, ate good food, tried to remember what I cared about before I cared about metrics and deadlines and deliverables. Miami's good for that. It reminds you that life is supposed to taste like something. While I was down there, I was also thinking about what was next. I knew I didn't want another video game gig. I'd given that 10 years. I wanted something that touched physical space. I'd been obsessed with sneakers my whole life, and one afternoon, kind of as a dare to myself, I slid into the DMs of a designer at Nike named Jason Cohan. Cold. Just introduced myself, told him what I'd done, told him I wanted a shot. No expectations, no follow-up plan if he didn't respond. He responded. We talked. He told me what the path could look like if I was willing to come up through the side door instead of the front. I was. That conversation put Oregon on the map for me. That conversation is probably the reason I'm writing this book, if you trace it all the way back. In between Miami and the Nike thing becoming real, I did something I've never been great at. I slowed down. I took a solo trip to Europe. I'd never done that. Never been the guy with the backpack in the hostel. I'm too regimented for that. But something in me said I needed to be alone on purpose for a while. So I went. Wandered through cities I didn't know. Ate dinners by myself. Took pictures nobody needed to see but me. Got reacquainted with the Brett who existed before EA, before the relationship, before the life I'd been building on top of all that. That trip taught me what solitude actually is. It isn't loneliness. Loneliness is when you don't want to be alone, and you are. Solitude is when you choose it. When you sit with yourself and learn what you sound like when nobody else is talking. I came back home and I started boxing. That's another thing people ask about. Why boxing? I'll tell you. Because it's the opposite of everything I'd been doing. I'd spent a decade making pixels move. I'd spent a lifetime processing quietly. I needed something that was loud, physical, immediate. Something where you either did the work or you got hit. Something that wasn't theoretical. I found a gym. I found a coach. And I started showing up 4 or 5 days a week. The guys there didn't know me. Nobody there cared about EA or Nike or any of it. They cared about whether I kept my hands up and whether I moved my feet. That gym became a second home. I'd go to work, come home, go to the gym, come back, rinse and repeat. I eventually tore my labrum in there, caught a hook wrong, over-rotated, and had to get surgery and go through physical therapy. But I loved it. I loved every bruise. I still do. That whole period, the layoff, the Miami reset, the DM, the solo Europe trip, the gym, that was the most I'd ever changed in the shortest amount of time. I went from a man who had an identity built around one company to a man who had to go figure out who he was from scratch. You couldn't have put me on Love is Blind before that. I wouldn't have been ready. I would have shown up with the wrong frame. I would have been looking for someone to validate me instead of someone to build with. I would have treated the pods like a career thing, a project, a challenge, something to optimize. But by the time the casting call came, I'd already been through my own little quiet reckoning. I'd already lost the job, lost the relationship, lost the assumption that my life was going in a straight line. And what I'd found in the rubble was me, just me. A man from Wilmington with a sketchbook and a gym bag and a plane ticket and a new job and no clue what was coming next. That man was ready to fall in love. He just didn't know it yet. Chapter 3. Houston. I'm from Houston, Texas, and if you know anything about Houston, you know that's not just a city, it's a whole identity. Houston raised me loud and proud and unapologetically myself. That's just what that city does. It's big and sprawling and diverse and hot as hell 6 months out of the year, and the folks who come out of Houston carry that energy with them wherever they go. We don't shrink. We don't apologize for taking up space. We show up exactly as we are. And if you can't handle that, baby, that's a you problem. I grew up around cousins and aunties and church ladies and block parties. Juneteenth was a whole season for us. Crawfish boils in the summer, rodeo every March. The kind of place where somebody's mama could raise the whole block with a single look. That's what shaped me. My boldness isn't just personality. It's geography. It's generations of women in my family who refuse to be small, handing that refusal down to me. My family is the foundation of everything. My dad is a man of few words, but every word he says means something. He's not the kind of father who's going to sit you down and have a long emotional conversation about his feelings. That's just not how he's built. But he's present. He shows up. And when he speaks, you listen. Because he doesn't waste words on things he doesn't mean. I didn't realize until much later how much I was looking for that in a partner. Someone whose words matched their actions. Someone who didn't just talk about being there. Someone who actually was. Growing up, I was the girl who broke expectations just for the fun of it. In band, they wanted me to play the flute. Because that's what girls play, right? Delicate little instrument for delicate little girls. I looked at that flute, and I was like, absolutely not. Too girly. I wanted to play something that made people pay attention. Something that said, I'm not going to be the thing you assume I am. That's been my whole life, really. Breaking the expectation, finding satisfaction in people doubting me, and then showing them exactly who I am. It's not arrogance. It's confidence. And there's a difference. Arrogance is thinking you're better than everyone else. Confidence is knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone reduce it. I know I'm great. I've said that publicly, and I meant it. I know I'm great, but I think I could be better with the right person. That's not a contradiction. That's a woman who loves herself enough to believe she deserves someone who adds to her life instead of subtracting from it. My career was in recruiting, client lead work, first at Insight Global, then at Amazon. I'm good with people. I always have been. I can read a room. I can tell within 5 minutes of a conversation whether someone is being real with me or performing a version of themselves they think I want to see. That skill served me well in business. It served me even better in the pods. I lived in Seattle before Portland, and I loved it there. Had my community, had my friends, had my routines. Seattle was mine in a way that Portland would take years to become. When they interviewed me for the show before filming, I told them, and I meant it, that I was tired of the Seattle dating scene. The men there were what I called reserved. Nice guys, cute guys, but reserved. They wouldn't take initiative. They wouldn't lead. They wouldn't just ask. I was a grown woman with a career and opinions and emotions, and I wanted a man who could match me, not a man who was waiting for me to do all the work while he figured out whether I was worth it. That was the problem I walked into. Love is blind trying to solve, not loneliness, not desperation. I had friends, I had hobbies, I had a life I liked. What I didn't have was a man who was willing to show up for me the same way I would show up for him. When it came to dating, I'd been around the block enough to know what I didn't want. My longest relationship was over a decade ago. By the time I walked into Love is Blind, I'd been single long enough to get comfortable with it. Comfortable enough that I wasn't desperate, but honest enough with myself to know that comfortable and fulfilled aren't the same thing. I wanted a partner, not someone to complete me. I was already whole, but someone to build with, someone who understood that love isn't about losing yourself in another person. It's about two complete people choosing to create something together that neither of them could build alone. I also wanted someone who could handle me, all of me, the emotions, the spontaneity, the energy, the opinions. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I always have. Some people find that intimidating. Some people find it exhausting. The right person finds it beautiful. I'd been watching Love is Blind like everyone else, and something about the concept spoke to me. Strip away the superficial, the looks, the Instagram, the physical first impression, and see what's actually there. See if two people can connect on the things that matter before the things that don't get in the way. I'm a person who leads with her heart, always have been. So the idea of falling in love through a wall, through conversation alone, through the vulnerability of being truly honest with a stranger, that didn't scare me. It excited me, because I'd been honest my whole life, honest about who I am, what I want, what I bring to the table. And I thought, if there's a man on the other side of that wall who can match that honesty, a man who's not intimidated by a woman who knows her worth, then maybe this crazy experiment might actually work. I packed my bags, I put on my best energy, and I walked into those pods knowing exactly one thing. I wasn't going to change a single thing about myself to make this work. Either someone was going to love me as I am, or they weren't. And I'd been okay with that my whole life. But secretly, privately, in the part of my heart I don't show to just anyone, I was hoping. Chapter 4, Day Ones. Before Brett, before the pods, before any of you heard me say a single word, I had my day ones. That's a Houston phrase. Day ones. It means the people who were there before, the ones who knew you when you were a little girl with 2 braids and a good idea a week, the ones who remember your first crush and your first heartbreak and the first time you decided you were going to be somebody. My day ones go back to elementary school. We're talking decades. We're talking friendships that predate social media, that predate cell phones with cameras, that predate me being anybody's version of grown. These are the sisters who knew me before edges and after edges, through every hairstyle and every relationship and every job and every move. When I moved to Seattle, I brought my day ones with me. Not physically. They stayed in Houston and Texas, spread across whatever cities, jobs, and marriages and life had carried them to. But they stayed in my life. I've been on a text thread with the same 3 women since we were 9 years old. 9. I know what those women ate for breakfast this morning. I know what they're crying about this week. I know what their kids are dressing up as for school. That's what a day one is. A woman who has been reading the weather report of your life for 30 years. When I went to Seattle, I built a second circle. And that second circle was real. It wasn't a day one circle. You don't get those twice. But it was real. Women I met at work. Women I met out dancing. Women I met because my dentist had a friend who needed somebody to go to brunch with. I built a Seattle community from the ground up, and by the time Love is Blind called, that community was deep. Those were women I took day trips to the beach with. Those were women I drove to Portland with for a weekend, just because Portland had a better restaurant that week. Those were women I called when I was spiraling, and they let me spiral, and then pulled me back. I tell you this because when I moved to Portland for Brett, that's what I left. I didn't just leave Seattle. I left the second circle. I left the women who had finally caught me up after my day ones had been catching me up from 1,000 miles away. I left a kitchen I knew, a grocery store I knew, a yoga instructor who knew my back problem without me having to tell her about it again. That's sacrifice, and I want to name it as sacrifice, not as romance, because I think women reduce their own sacrifice when they talk about love. Women say, "Oh, I moved for him," like it's a line in a Hallmark movie. It's not a line. It's your life. It's your community. It's the group chat that suddenly has to reorganize because you're not there for Friday drinks anymore. My day ones clocked every single moment of it. When I told them I was going on the show, they were cautious. They'd known me too long to be polite about it. One of them said, "Tiffany, I don't want you on TV." Another one said, "Sis, I don't want you falling for a man, moving cities, and then it not working." They weren't being unsupportive. They were being my day ones. They were asking the questions my excitement wasn't letting me ask. That's sisterhood. That's aunties before we're aunties. That's the whole culture. When it worked, when Brett turned out to be Brett, they celebrated loud. But they were also watching, closely, because that's what day ones do. They love you, and they protect you, and they watch the new man until they're sure about him. Brett met them early. I brought him down to Houston because there was no version of me marrying somebody my day ones hadn't cleared. He walked into a room of women who had been friends for longer than some marriages last, and he didn't flinch. He was quiet, the way he always is. He listened. He laughed in the right spots. He didn't try to be the loudest one. He didn't try to prove anything. When we left, One of my day ones pulled me aside. She said, "He's real. He's actually real." And I said, "I know." And she said, "Good." That was the clearance I was waiting for. Not from producers, not from camera operators, not from the Netflix edit. From the women who have been reading me since I was 9 years old. Portland is a small city. I knew that before I moved. But knowing and feeling are different. Nothing prepares you for how small a city can feel when you don't know anyone except the man you married. So I had to do what my day ones would tell me to do if I called them in a panic. I had to build a third circle. I started showing up to dance classes alone. I started going to events by myself. I joined a bachata ladies team and treated my teammates like potential day ones in training. I invited women to coffee. I invited women to my house. I built a Portland circle the same way I'd built a Seattle one coffee at a time, one text at a time, one "Hey, you free Saturday" at a time. It's working. I have my Portland girls now. They're not my day ones, but they love me, and I love them, and we're building our own history. My day ones still get the 6 a.m. texts. They still get the screenshots. They still get the voice notes that are 3 minutes long and include a laugh from me that I would never put on a podcast. That's a privilege you earn by being there before. And they were there before. Before Brett. Before Seattle. Before everything. Every woman needs day ones. If you have them, call them today. If you don't, find them. Start now. Because the day ones you make in your 30s don't replace the day ones you made in elementary school, but they build something real. And when life moves you to a new city for a man you met through a wall, those are the women who will hold you together while you figure out who you are, here instead of there. Chapter 5. Love in Reverse. People ask me all the time how a grown man with a job at Nike ends up on a dating show on Netflix. Here's the honest answer. A casting producer slid into my Instagram DMs. No cold call, no friend of a friend. A message on a platform I mostly use to post sneaker photos, and a few carefully curated shots from my camera. It said something to the effect of, "Hey, I work with a show. We think you'd be a great fit for our next season. Would you be open to a conversation?" I almost ignored it. I get random DMs. Most of them aren't real. But this one was real. I hopped on a call with them. They explained the concept. I'd seen a little bit of Love is Blind by that point. Enough to know the premise, not enough to be a super fan. What hooked me wasn't the show. What hooked me was the framing. They said, "This is love in reverse." Normally dating works front to back. You see somebody, you like what you see, you get their number, you talk, you go out. You find out if you like their insides after you've already decided you like their outsides. That's how every dating app works. That's how every bar works. That's how every first impression in the history of the human species has worked. Outside first, inside second. Love is Blind flips it. Inside first, outside second. You talk to a stranger through a wall. You learn their values, their fears, their family, their pain, their sense of humor. You build a relationship on nothing but words and time. And then, only after you've decided you love this person, do you see what they look like. Love in reverse. That phrase did something to me, because that's how I'd been trying to date my whole adult life and failing. I'd been trying to get people to lead with substance, and they kept leading with aesthetics. I'd been trying to have the real conversation first, and they kept wanting to have the surface conversation first. I'd started to wonder if the kind of connection I wanted was even possible in a world built around swiping. Here was a show telling me, "We've built the system you've been looking for. Come try it." I said yes. I want to name something that I've named before in interviews, because I think it matters. I went into those pods hoping to find a black woman. That wasn't a rule. It wasn't a requirement in a cruel way. It wasn't about excluding anybody. It was about the life I wanted to build, the family I wanted to have, the community I wanted to come home to. I am who I am. I grew up where I grew up. I wanted a partner who understood that without me having to translate. And I'm allowed to want that. Everybody's allowed to know what they want. I said that on the show, and I'll say it in this book. I'm not going to pretend I walked in without preferences. I walked in knowing exactly who I was and what I was hoping for. That's not closing yourself off. That's being honest. Now, the filming itself. Let me pull the curtain back a little because people ask. The pods are small. The lighting is soft. You sit on one side, your conversation partner sits on the other, and there is a wall between you that looks like glowing stained glass. You cannot see each other. You can hear each other. That's it. There are producers. There are cameras. But in the moment, you forget. You forget faster than you'd think, because the whole point of the experience is that you're alone with a voice and your own heartbeat. Once the conversation starts, the room kind of disappears. You stop thinking about cameras because you're too busy thinking about the actual person you're talking to. The schedule is intense. You are in the pods all day. You are talking to multiple women in a day. You're taking emotional inventory of those conversations in between, trying to keep them straight, trying to remember which one of them told you about her grandfather and which one mentioned she hates cilantro. You are tired. You are overstimulated. You are underslept. That's the design. They're not trying to torture you. They're trying to make sure you can't perform. If you had a full 8 hours of sleep and a light schedule, you could keep up a character. You could curate. You could hide. But if you're running on 4 hours of sleep and you've had 6 conversations in a day, you start saying whatever's actually true for you because you don't have the energy to construct a version of yourself. That's when the show works. That's when it surfaces the real person. For me, it worked early. Within the first couple of days, I'd already started noticing that one voice was pulling me back. I'd sit down in a pod and I'd be hoping, not performing, hoping that it was her again. Tiffany. I didn't know her face. I didn't know her height. I didn't know what she'd wear on a Saturday or what her signature perfume smelled like. I knew her voice. I knew her laugh. I knew the way she said things with her whole chest and the way she listened when I said something with mine. Love in reverse, the producer had told me. It worked. It actually worked. I walked into those pods as a private person, a designer, a quiet guy from Wilmington who'd been rebuilding his life one boxing class at a time, and I walked out engaged to a woman I'd never seen. That's not a reality TV plot. That's a miracle with cameras. Chapter 6. Intention. They ask you a lot of questions before they let you on the show. Producers, psychologists, the whole thing. And somewhere in all of that, someone asked me what I was looking for. I said, I'm here for a reason. I'm here for a purpose. That wasn't a line. That wasn't something I rehearsed or thought would sound good on camera. That was the truth of where I was in my life at 36 years old. I wasn't dating casually anymore. I wasn't swiping through apps and going on forgettable first dates and telling myself that something would eventually click if I just kept showing up. I was done with the aimless version of dating. I was dating with intention. That phrase, dating with intention, gets thrown around a lot, and I think most people don't understand what it actually means. Doesn't mean you're desperate. It doesn't mean you're rushing. It means you know what you want. You know what you're willing to give, and you're not going to waste your time or anyone else's pretending otherwise. I'd done an interview a couple years before all of this, where somebody asked me what the most disrespectful thing someone could do in dating was. I said ghosting, without hesitation. Because ghosting tells the other person they're not worth a sentence. It says, I'd rather vanish than be honest with you for 30 seconds. I'd been on the receiving end of ghosting plenty. I'd also been direct with women in ways that they didn't expect, because I came up believing that clarity was a form of respect. I compared dating to applying for a job once in that same interview, and I caught a little bit of heat for it. But the comparison stands. You show up as your full self. You state your qualifications. You state what you're looking for. You say thank you for your time, and you move on if it's not a fit. That's not cold. That's respectful. The worst thing you can do to another human being is waste their time pretending to be interested when you're not. My brother's death did that to me. Not all at once. Grief doesn't work like that. It works slowly, over months and years, recalibrating your priorities until one day you wake up and realize you've changed. The things that used to matter don't matter as much. The things you used to put off feel urgent, and the life you were building, career, hobbies, apartment, routine, starts to feel incomplete. Not because it isn't good, because it isn't full. I wanted a wife. I wanted a partner. I wanted someone who saw the real me, not the Nike director, not the sneaker guy, not the quiet kid from North Carolina who made good. The actual me, the one who processes things slowly, who expresses love through actions more than words, who can sit in silence with someone for an hour and feel closer to them than he would after 100 conversations. Portland hadn't been easy for dating. It's a small city, and the dating pool is what it is. I'd had relationships, but nothing that stuck, nothing that felt like it was heading somewhere permanent, and I'd started to wonder, not in a hopeless way, but in an honest way, whether the kind of connection I was looking for actually existed outside of movies and other people's marriages. When Love is Blind came up, my first instinct was curiosity. Not skepticism, not excitement, curiosity. The concept made sense to me on a level that surprised me. As someone who works in design, who thinks about how things are built from the ground up, the idea of stripping away the visual and building a connection from conversation alone felt like a design challenge. Start with the foundation. See if the structure holds before you add the finish. I said yes, not recklessly, deliberately. Because if there's one thing my brother's death taught me, it's that the things you keep saying no to because the timing isn't right or the situation isn't perfect, those are the things you regret when time runs out. I walked into those pods the way I walk into everything, prepared, focused, and carrying more emotion than my face lets on. Chapter 7. Here for a Reason. Love is Blind was filmed in Seattle, which felt like a sign, or at least convenient, since that's where I was living in the time. I didn't have to fly across the country or uproot my life to do this. I just had to show up and be willing to be completely vulnerable with a stranger through a wall. Easy, right? I'm kidding. It was terrifying. But it was the kind of terrifying that I'd been chasing my whole life. The kind that feels like growth, not danger. The kind where you know that whatever happens on the other side of this leap, you're going to learn something about yourself that you didn't know before. The pods are smaller than they look on TV, more intimate. The lighting is soft, the seats are close to the wall, and when you're in there, it's just you and a voice and the sound of your own heartbeat reminding you that this is real. This isn't rehearsal. This is your actual life. I had conversations with several men in those pods. Good conversations, interesting men. But from the very beginning, there was something different about Brett. He didn't come in swinging. That's the first thing I noticed. Most guys, when they're trying to impress you, especially in a setting like the pods where conversation is all you've got, they come in big. Big energy, big personality, big declarations about what they want and who they are. They're performing. They're auditioning for the role of your person, and they want you to know they're worth the callback. Brett didn't do that. Brett walked in calm, steady, intentional. That word again. He said he was here for a reason, here for a purpose, and I believed him immediately because there was nothing performative about the way he said it. It was just a fact, like telling me the sky was blue or water was wet. He was here for a reason. He asked me questions that most people don't ask until months into a relationship. Not surface questions. Not what's your favorite color or where did you go to school. Questions about values, about family, about what I wanted my life to look like and what I was willing to do to build it. And he listened. Lord, did this man listen? When I talked, he didn't just wait for his turn to speak. He absorbed it, processed it, sat with it. And then when he responded, his responses showed me he'd actually heard what I said, not just the words, but the meaning underneath them. Within 5 days, I knew. That sounds fast. It sounds reckless. It sounds like the kind of thing a therapist would tell you to slow down about. But here's what I've learned about knowing. Sometimes the knowing comes first, and the understanding comes later. Sometimes your heart arrives at a truth before your brain has finished running the numbers. And if you've done enough work on yourself, enough therapy, enough reflection, enough honest reckoning with what you actually want versus what you think you should want, then you can trust the knowing. I trusted it. I trusted it because Brett wasn't just saying the right things. He was being the right person. There's a difference, and it's everything. Chapter 8. The Brother. There's a moment in the pods that most people probably don't think about as much as I do, but it's the moment that changed everything for me. The moment I knew this wasn't just a connection. It was something I needed to protect. Tiffany had been open with me from the start. That's her nature. She wears her emotions on the outside, shares them freely, gives them to you like gifts. And I'd been receiving those gifts carefully, gratefully. but I hadn't fully given mine yet. Because the thing about being the quiet one, the processor, the man who sits in silence before he speaks, the thing nobody tells you about being that person is that the silence isn't empty. It's full of things you're not sure how to say, full of emotions you haven't found the right container for yet, full of a past that shaped you in ways you're still trying to understand. I told her about my brother. I don't share this story easily. It's not a story I tell on first dates or in casual conversation or even with people I've known for years. It's the kind of story that lives deep in your chest, in the place where grief and gratitude get tangled up together. And when you pull it out to show someone, you're pulling out a piece of yourself that you can't put back. My brother was engaged. The family was supposed to be getting together for a wedding. Instead, we got together for a funeral. He passed away unexpectedly, and in one moment, every assumption I'd ever made about the future, about having time, about the luxury of putting things off, about the safety of playing it safe, all of it evaporated. I could feel myself getting emotional as I talked. That's not something I'm comfortable with. I wasn't raised to show emotion that way. My family, we deal with things internally, privately, in whatever way lets us keep moving forward. But sitting in that pod with Tiffany on the other side of the wall, I couldn't hold it in. I didn't want to hold it in. And what she did next is the reason I'm telling you this story in this book. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't tell me it would be okay. She didn't minimize it or redirect the conversation or do that thing people do when they're uncomfortable with someone else's pain, where they offer solutions instead of space. She said, "Your reservations and your feelings are valid." That's it. That's all she said. And it was everything. Your reservations are valid. That sentence landed in my chest like something heavy and warm settling into place. Because what she was really saying, what she meant underneath those words, was, I see you. I see the pain you're carrying. I'm not going to try to take it away or make it smaller. I'm going to sit here with you in it and let you feel what you need to feel. And then she said, "The only thing I can do is hope I can love you in the way I feel that you deserve." I've played that sentence back in my head 1,000 times. The only thing I can do is hope, not a promise, because how could she promise something like that? Not a guarantee, just hope, honest, vulnerable, unprotected hope. That's when I started to fall. Not because she said something perfect, because she said something real. In a world where everyone's performing their best self, this woman looked at my worst moment and said, "Your feelings are valid, and I want to love you through it." I wasn't the same after that conversation. I don't think I could be. Chapter 9. The shoe. There's a white shoe in a box that I brought into the pods. A small one, barely bigger than a child's sneaker. When I showed it to Tiffany through that wall, she thought I was about to tell her something about future children. I could feel her leaning forward on the other side, probably already picturing a nursery. It was actually a shoe I designed myself, for myself, years ago, before Nike. Before any of this, when I was still trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. It's the shoe that started everything. The first time I took an idea out of my head and made it real. The first time I looked at something I'd created with my own hands and thought, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I brought it into the pods because I wanted Tiffany to understand something about me that I don't always know how to say with words. I'm a builder. That's what I do. I take nothing and I make it into something. A career in video games that no one expected. A position at the biggest footwear company in the world without a college degree. A life in a city 3,000 miles from where I grew up. I don't have a college degree. That's something I told Tiffany in the pods, and I could feel the weight of it. The way that admission hangs in the air when you're talking to someone you're trying to build a life with. Because the world still judges that. People still hear no degree and make assumptions about your intelligence, your ambition, your worth. Tiffany admitted later that she probably would have judged me for it if she'd just seen it on a dating profile. But that's exactly why the pods work. Because she didn't see a resume. She heard a voice. She heard a story about a kid from North Carolina who grew up in a house where the electricity wasn't always on. Who taught himself to draw because it was the only thing that made sense, who turned that drawing into a decade in video games and then into a directorship at Nike, all without a piece of paper from a university. It's about talent. It's about drive. It's about being the kind of person who sees a door that wasn't built for him and builds his own. That shoe in the box wasn't just a shoe. It was proof. Proof that I could take something from nothing and make it matter. And when Tiffany held it, or imagined holding it on the other side of that wall, I wanted her to know that I would do the same thing with us. Take what we're building and make it something real. The conversations after that night went deeper than anything I'd experienced before. Not just deeper in content, deeper in honesty. I told her about growing up without much, about the electricity being off, about friends wanting to come over and me and my brother having to make excuses because we didn't want them to see how we were living. That's not something I share with people. That's the kind of thing you carry quietly. The kind of backstory that gets edited out when people see where you ended up. But Tiffany didn't flinch. She didn't pity me. She didn't do that thing people do where they tilt their head and say, "I'm so sorry," in a way that makes you feel smaller. She just listened. And then she said something about the satisfaction of proving people wrong. And I knew right then that this woman understood me. She understood the hunger, the drive, the part of me that turns doubt into fuel, because she does the same thing. She always has. By the 5th day, I knew she was the one. Not in a fireworks and fairy dust way, in a structural way, the way an architect looks at a foundation and knows it'll hold, the way a designer looks at a prototype and knows it works. Every conversation confirmed what my gut already told me. This woman and I were built from the same material. Chapter 10. Daddy's Home. I need to tell you about the nap. Yes, that nap. The one that had the entire internet losing its mind. The one that the crew gave Brett sympathetic looks about. The one that almost ended us before we even began. Here's what happened. It was late in the pod process, close to the end. We'd been talking for days by this point, deep conversations that left me emotionally wrung out in the best way. I'd been building up to something I'd been feeling for days, but hadn't said out loud because saying it out loud makes it real, and real is terrifying even when it's beautiful. I looked at that wall and I said, "I already feel as though I'm in love with you." There it was, out in the air, the the biggest, most vulnerable thing I could say to another human being, and I said it first. I said it without waiting for him to say it, without testing the waters, without hedging or qualifying or adding a but at the end. I just put my heart out there. And Brett, this beautiful, thoughtful, slow processing man, did what Brett does. He paused. Now, here's something you need to understand about Brett that I didn't fully understand yet at that point. He's an active listener. He digests information before he speaks. When you say something important to him, he doesn't just react, he sits with it, turns it over, examines it from every angle before he responds. In person, you can see this happening. You can see his eyes go inward. You can feel the gears turning. It looks like thoughtfulness, because it is thoughtfulness. In the pods, though, where all you have is a voice and silence, a long pause doesn't look like thoughtfulness. A long pause looks like rejection. I checked in. Brett, you still there? And he said, yeah, I'm just thinking. And I checked in again, and again he was just thinking. And I didn't know it yet. I didn't have the data I have now after 3 years of marriage. That just thinking is Brett's love language. That his silence is never empty. That the pause before he speaks is where all the real work happens. But in that moment, sitting on my side of the wall, my heart wide open and my confession hanging in the air, the silence felt like an answer, and the answer felt like, he doesn't feel the same way. So my body did what my body does when it's been carrying too much emotion for too long. It released. The relief of finally saying what I'd been feeling, the sheer weight of that confession lifting off my chest. It soothed me, literally soothed me, like a baby who's been crying and finally stops because the tension broke. I fell asleep. I fell asleep on the man I'd just told I was in love with. He was on the other side of that wall, processing the most intimate words anyone had ever said to him, and I was out cold. When I woke up, it was because the girls came to get me, Chelsea and the other women shaking me awake, and I came to consciousness singing Usher, because apparently that's what I do when I wake up. I just came alive, singing, dancing, no idea that on the other side of that wall, a man's heart was cracking. Brett, you still there? He was not there. He'd left. And the crew, the camera operators, the producers, everyone who'd been watching, they looked at him with faces that said, do you need a hug? Like they'd just witnessed something they didn't know how to process. I'm done, is what Brett said. I'm done. And my heart dropped straight through the floor. Chapter 11. A small moment. I need to tell you what actually happened on my side of that wall, because the show couldn't show all of it, and the internet definitely didn't get all of it. When Tiffany told me she was in love with me, I did what I do. I paused. I sat with it. I was trying to find the right words to match the size of what she'd just said, because I love you too didn't feel like enough. I wanted to build her a response. I wanted to design it. That's how my brain works. I heard her ask if I was still there. I said yes. I kept working on my words. Then I heard her say my name again, and I responded. And then it went quiet, really quiet. At first, I thought the audio had cut out. That's the truth. We'd had tech issues earlier in filming. The show is a production. Sometimes the mics flicker. And when I called her name and she didn't come back, my first thought was literally, did the audio drop? So I got up. I walked out of the pod. I went and found a producer. I said something like, "Hey, I think my audio's cut. Something's wrong. She's not responding." The producer looked at me, gave me a little bit of a face I didn't understand in the moment, said something like, "You good, go back in." So I did. I went back into the pod and I sat back down. Still silence from her side. Then the producer came over the headset and told me directly, she fell asleep. She fell asleep. I want you to imagine that from my perspective for a second. You've just been told that the woman you're falling for has confessed her love to you. You've been building your response. You've stepped out and back in. And then a producer tells you that while you were doing all of that, she fell asleep. I laid down. That's the honest thing I haven't told a lot of people. I didn't get up and storm out. I lay down on the floor of that pod, and I waited out the rest of the time in silence, because what else was I going to do? There was nobody on the other side. There was nothing to say. I just laid there and let the time run out. When I finally did walk out, the crew gave me that look. Not pity exactly, more like they didn't have a word for what they'd just seen. Because in the entire history of Love is Blind, across all the seasons, nobody had ever fallen asleep on the person they were falling in love with. That was new. That was uniquely ours. I said I was done. I meant it, in the moment. That's the thing about hurt. It makes you want to protect yourself. It makes you want to close the door before anyone can walk through it and hurt you again. That's the kid from North Carolina in me. The kid who didn't always have friends, who learned to be okay alone, who built walls out of silence and self-sufficiency. But here's what I learned about myself that night. I'm not the kind of man who stays in the hurt. I'm the kind who sits with it, processes it. There's that word again. And then asks himself the question that actually matters. Is this the thing that ends it? Or is this the story we tell? By the next morning, I'd arrived at the answer. It's going to be a small moment in a funny story of our journey together. That's what I said to her when we talked again. And I meant every word. Because I'd done the math. And I mean the real math, not the emotional math that your ego does in the dark at 2 a.m. I thought about who this woman was, what she'd shown me, how she'd validated my brother, how she'd received my story about growing up without electricity, how she'd said, "I know I'm great, but I think I could be better with you." I thought about all of that, and then I thought about one moment, one honest, human, exhausted moment, and I asked myself, is this worth throwing away? No, it wasn't, not even close. In a year, in 5 years, in 20 years, I wasn't going to remember the hurt. I was going to remember the story, the woman who loved me so much that confessing it literally put her to sleep, the relief in her body when she finally said the words, the way she woke up singing Usher like nothing had happened, because for her everything was fine. She'd said what she needed to say, and the weight was gone. That's beautiful. If you look at it the right way, and I chose to look at it the right way, that's the most beautiful thing anyone had ever done in those pods. She apologized. Of course she did. She's Tiffany. She showed up with an apology that was genuine and kind and also somehow managed to be charming, because this woman could charm the bark off a tree. And I let her in, not because the apology was perfect, but because the person giving it was. I'm just really thankful that you came into my life at the right time. That's what she said, and I could feel my walls coming down, one by one, like a building being carefully dismantled instead of demolished. Then I got on one knee, not literally, you can't kneel through a wall, but I asked her to marry me, the first proposal of our season, the first couple to go from strangers to engaged, and when I asked, there was no pause, no processing, no silence. She said yes, immediately, like she'd been waiting for the question her whole life and was annoyed it took me this long to ask. I feel like we would bring so much happiness into each other's lives. That's what I told her. And it wasn't a prediction. It was a promise. Will you marry me? Yes. And somewhere in the production booth, the producers probably breathed the biggest sigh of relief of their careers. Because after the nap heard round the world, at least one couple was going to make it out of the pods intact. Chapter 12. Get Your Man. I was looking for my soulmate, somebody that I feel my most authentic self with. And it's him. That's what I told the cameras before the reveal, and I meant it with everything in me. But meaning it and being ready for it are two different things, because no matter how much you believe in the connection, no matter how deep the conversations went, no matter how many times you told yourself that love is blind, there's a moment right before you see them where your brain reminds you, you have no idea what this person looks like. They told me to walk out, to go get my man, and I took a breath, the kind of breath you take before you jump off something high, and I walked out of those doors, and there he was, Brett Brown, standing there in person for the first time, and my first thought, my very first thought, the one that came before anything logical or measured or reasonable, was, look at him. He was handsome. That's the objective truth, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't notice it. But it was more than handsome. It was the way he carried himself, the posture, the quiet confidence, the way he looked at me with those eyes that said everything his mouth wouldn't. Because that's Brett. He says more with a look than most men say in an hour. I went right in, kiss. No hesitation. I'm not the kind of woman who plays coy, and this was not the moment for holding back. I'd told this man I loved him through a wall. I'd fallen asleep on him. I'd apologized while singing Usher. The time for playing it cool had long since passed. The height was good. That mattered to me, not because I'm shallow, but because when you're a woman in heels who stands at a certain height, you want to feel held. You want to fit, and we fit. I'm never going to forget this moment, I told him, and I won't. I can close my eyes right now and see it perfectly. The light, his face, the feeling of his arms around me for the first time, the way everything that had been theoretical, every conversation, every confession, every silent moment on opposite sides of that wall suddenly became real in the space between our bodies. We looked great together. I know that sounds vain, and I don't care. We looked like we belonged together. His calm and my energy, his quiet and my volume, his neatness and my spontaneity. We were complementary in a way that felt designed, like someone had looked at both of us and said, these two, put these two in the same room and see what happens. What happened was love. What happened was two people who'd been brave enough to be vulnerable through a wall, finally getting to be vulnerable face to face. What happened was the beginning of everything. Mexico came next. The trip where you're supposed to figure out if the person you fell in love with blind can survive the real world. and Mexico was where I saw sides of Brett that the pods couldn't show me. The designer in him, the way he noticed details, aesthetics, the way things were arranged, the gentleman, pulling out chairs, carrying bags, walking on the outside of the sidewalk, the goofy side, the one that comes out when he's comfortable, when the walls are down, when he's not being careful about what he says because he's too busy being happy. He said something to me in Mexico that I carry with me everywhere. We were sitting together, looking at each other the way new couples do when they can't quite believe the other person is real. And he said, "I feel like everybody around you is happier because of you, not you're beautiful, not you're sexy, not any of the surface things that men say when they're trying to impress you." He talked about my spirit, my energy, the effect I have on the people around me. He saw me, not the body, not the face, not the Instagram version, me, the person, the energy, the light. That's when I knew I wasn't just in love with this man. I was home. Mexico did something else, too, that I want to name. It gave us the first real stretch of time alone as a couple. No pod walls, no cameras inches from our faces at all times. Just us figuring out how two strangers who said yes to each other actually navigate a day. What do you order for breakfast? Who picks the restaurant? How does a nap work when you're finally in the same room, on the same bed, without a wall between you? We learned that the same week we were also learning what each other looked like in the morning, what each other sounded like when we laughed unguarded, what each other did when we were tired. It was a crash course, and Brett passed every single question. There's a moment in Mexico I think about a lot. I walked into the bathroom one night and I could smell something, warm, faintly sweet, like the start of a candle. I came out and Brett had dimmed the lights. Nothing elaborate, no rose petals, no violinists, none of the performative romance that people think has to happen when there are cameras around. Just a room that was suddenly softer than it had been 5 minutes before. He'd made it softer on purpose, for me, not for a storyline, not for a scene, for me. That's Brett. That's what he does. He designs environments because environments are how he loves. Chapter 13. Bougie Brett. The apartment was a problem. Or rather, the apartment was perfect, which was the problem. We got back from Mexico and it was time for me to see where Brett actually lived. His apartment in Portland. And I walked in and my first thought was, "Oh, this man is neat." And my second thought was, "Oh, this man is really neat." And my third thought was, where am I going to put anything? Everything in that apartment had a place. The furniture was clean-lined and intentional. The shoe collection was displayed like an exhibit, organized, curated, lit properly. The kitchen was spotless. The closet was a work of art. This man's wardrobe was hung by color, by category, by occasion. It looked like a page from a design magazine, which makes sense because this man is a designer and his life is his portfolio. Bougie Brett. That's what I called him, and I said it with love and also with a little bit of genuine concern, because where in this perfectly arranged apartment was I, a woman who leaves water on the bathroom floor and wakes up at dawn to drive to Vancouver on a whim, supposed to fit? But here's what I loved about that moment. When I teased him, when I called him bougie, when I said his taste was high-end, when I looked at his luggage collection and my eyes went wide, he didn't get defensive. He laughed. He played along. He said, If we need more space, I can just move us into a bigger unit in the building. Problem solved. Like it was the simplest thing in the world. That's the thing about Brett and money that I want to be clear about. He has nice things. He works at Nike. He's done well for himself, but he's not flashy about it, and he's not precious about it. When we talked about finances, he offered to cover 75% of our bills without blinking. Not because he wanted control, because he wanted partnership. He wanted to create a situation where we both felt taken care of, where the bills were covered, where neither of us had to stress about money getting in the way of the life we were trying to build. I told him my philosophy. As long as our bills are paid, I don't want to police how you spend your money, and I don't want anyone policing how I spend mine. And he heard that. He received it. He said, I'm fine with 75-25, and I said, absolutely. And that was it. No argument, no negotiation, no drama. I know that doesn't sound exciting for a reality show. Nobody's tuning in to watch two people calmly discuss their household budget. But that's exactly why Brett and I worked. The things that could have been fights, the apartment, the money, the fact that I was going to need to move my entire life from Seattle to Portland. We turned them into conversations. We talked about them like two people who were on the same team instead of two people trying to win. I cooked in that kitchen for the first time, and I think it was the first time the stove had been used for something other than boiling water. Brett looked at me like I'd performed a magic trick. This man was living on DoorDash and design aesthetics, and I walked in with spices and intention and changed the entire energy of that space. There was also a punching bag in the living room. I want to tell you that because it's funny. This beautifully designed apartment with curated furniture and museum-level shoe displays, and then right there, next to the couch, a full-on punching bag. I asked him how long it had been there. He said, like a year and a half before we started dating. I looked at him and I said, Sir, sir. And he laughed because he knew. He knew it was ridiculous. But that bag was part of who he was. That bag had been his therapy after the layoff, the companion to the boxing gym, the reason he could sleep some nights when his brain wouldn't shut off. I didn't tell him to move it. Not in the first year. I let bougie Brett keep his punching bag in his living room because that contradiction, the immaculate design guy and the dude throwing combinations at a bag in the middle of his apartment, that was him. Both things at once, and I wasn't going to erase half of him just because the other half had better feng shui. He told me later that watching me cook in his kitchen was the moment he could picture it. All of it. The future, the house, the life. Me, moving through a space that was ours, not just his. And I understood that, because I felt it too. Standing in his kitchen with my phone playing music and a pot on the stove and this man watching me with eyes that said, "This is what I've been waiting for." That was the moment Portland stopped being Brett's city and started becoming our city. We had a lot to figure out, the logistics of combining two lives that were built independently, the reality of me leaving Seattle, my friends, my community, my routines, the question of what my life would look like in a city where the only person I knew was my husband. But we'd figure it out. That was the thing about us. We always figured it out. not by avoiding the hard conversations, but by walking straight into them, holding hands and talking until the problem was smaller than the solution. Bougie Brett needed a little chaos in his life, and I was more than happy to provide it. Chapter 14. May I Join You? There's a scene from the show that most people skip past because it doesn't have the drama they're looking for. No one yells, no one storms out, no one says something they can't take back. It's quiet and gentle, and it's the most important moment of our entire season. Tiffany was stressed, not about us, about everything else. The wedding planning, the logistics, her mom being in town, the bridesmaids' dresses, the timeline, work, all of it collapsing on her at once in the way life does when you're trying to do something enormous, and the details start multiplying faster than you can manage them. She was in the kitchen sniffing a candle, an unlit candle, just holding it and breathing in the scent because she was so overwhelmed that she needed something, anything, to calm her nervous system. I watched her from the doorway and I could see it. The tension in her shoulders, the way her breath was shallow, the effort it was taking her to keep it together. Some men see their partner breaking down and they feel attacked, like the stress is a personal failure, like if they were a better partner, she wouldn't be feeling this way. Some men see tears and immediately try to fix whatever caused them, because fixing is more comfortable than feeling. Some men see emotion and back away, because emotion is a territory they were never taught to navigate. I walked over to the couch where she was sitting, and before I sat down, I said, "May I join you?" That's it. That's the thing. 3 words. May I join you? Not an assumption that she wanted company, not an intrusion, a question. Because I'd learned, from my family, from my brother's death, from every relationship that hadn't worked before this one, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is give them the choice of whether to let you in. She said yes. I sat down. I put my arms out and she leaned into me and I held her. Not tight, held. Like I was creating a space she could fill however she needed. She said, "I'm trying not to cry." And I said, "How come?" Not, "Don't cry," not, "It's okay," not, "What's wrong, let me fix it." Just, "How come? Tell me what's happening. I want to understand." She started talking about the stress, about her mom, about the dresses and the timeline and the pressure of getting married in front of cameras when she could barely think straight. And I listened the way I always listen, fully, completely, taking it in before I say anything back. Then I said, "This stuff that we're dealing with, it's a lot. It makes sense that you would feel this way, and it's okay to feel that way. Validation. That's the word that a therapist would use. But it's not a technique for me. It's how I was taught to love, not with words my family never said, but with presence my family always showed. My dad couldn't tell you he loved you, but he could sit with you in silence while the world fell apart, and you'd know. My mom couldn't always say it either, but she could make a house feel safe just by being in it. That's what I was trying to do for Tiffany on that couch. Make the space safe. She said something that scared me a little. She said, "I don't want a wedding." And I knew in my bones that she didn't mean she didn't want to marry me. She meant she was drowning, and the wedding was the water. She was so overwhelmed by the logistics of the thing that the thing itself had become the enemy, And the worst thing I could have done in that moment was personalize it. The worst thing would have been to hear, "I don't want a wedding," and respond with, "Are you saying you don't want to marry me?" I didn't say that. I said, "I'm just here to listen. I want you to be able to vent and process," because that's what she needed. Not solutions, not reassurance. Space. Space to feel what she was feeling without being judged for feeling it. Space to say the scary thing out loud and have someone receive it without making it bigger or smaller than it was. She cried into my shirt, and I held her, and I thought about my brother, about how short life is, about how the things that stress us out on any given Tuesday are never the things that matter when you look at the whole picture. I thought about the suit that I'd been stressing about, my own version of her stress, smaller but real, and I thought about how all of it, every single logistical headache, was just background noise to the signal that actually mattered. I loved this woman, and she loved me, and we were about to promise each other forever. "Why doesn't it scare you?" she asked me. The wedding, the speed, the enormity of what we were doing. I said, "Because of you. I see the future so clearly with you." That wasn't a line. That was the truest thing I've ever said. When you're dating with intention, when you have a purpose, when you know what you want and you've found it, the fear disappears. Not because the situation isn't scary, because the person makes the scary feel survivable. She stopped crying eventually. She took a deep breath. She looked at me with those eyes, those big, honest, emotion-filled eyes, and I could see the storm passing. Not because I fixed it, because I sat in it with her and didn't run. That's what love looks like. Not grand gestures, not viral moments, not even the altar. Love looks like a man asking, "May I join you?" and meaning it. Love looks like letting someone cry on your shirt without checking the fabric. Love looks like holding space. Chapter 15. A family that doesn't say it. Meeting Brett's family was the moment I understood him. Not intellectually. I'd understood him intellectually since the pods, but emotionally, viscerally, in the way where you see someone's origins and suddenly every quirk, every pause, everything you loved about them but couldn't fully explain, makes perfect sense. His family doesn't say it. They love each other, that's obvious. You can see it in how they show up, how they support, how they circle around each other. But the words, "I love you," "I'm proud of you," "You mean the world to me," those words don't come easily. Brett told me this in the pods, but seeing it in person was different. Hearing his family say, "We're not the best at telling each other how we feel. We barely hug." And there was Brett, sitting in front of them, a man who had just spent weeks in a pod, pouring his heart out to a stranger through a wall, learning a new language of love that his family had never spoken. I saw something in that room that I don't think Brett saw himself. I saw a man who was growing, who was becoming something new because love demanded it. The Brett who walked into those pods was a man who processed silently, who communicated through action, who let his design work and his shoe collection and his perfectly organized apartment speak for the parts of himself that words couldn't reach, and that Brett was still there. He always would be. But sitting with Tiffany across from his family, there was also a new Brett, one who was learning that sometimes you have to say it. Sometimes the action isn't enough. Sometimes the person you love needs to hear the words even when the words feel foreign in your mouth. His family received me with warmth, not the loud, dramatic reality TV warmth where everyone's performing for cameras. Quiet warmth, measured warmth, the kind of warmth that takes a while to settle in because it's real. And I respected that, because I come from a different family, a family that says it. My friends say it. My community says it. I'm the woman who told a man I was falling in love with him on day 5 and then fell asleep because the relief of saying it was that powerful. I live out loud. I always have. But loving Brett meant learning to hear a different kind of love. Love that shows up in a perfectly tailored suit because he cares about how he presents himself, and by extension, us. Love that shows up in a shoe wall that tells the story of his entire creative journey. Love that shows up in a long pause that isn't silence. It's consideration. His parents, I learned, have been married over 40 years. That's the blueprint Brett grew up with. 2 people who chose each other once and just kept choosing. Not with speeches, not with anniversaries posted online. With presence, with showing up, with the kind of steady, unglamorous love that builds a life. That blueprint is in him. I see it every day. His dad didn't meet me until the wedding day. That's how it worked out with the timeline, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. Because a father handing over his child, his son, the one who survived, the one who's still here after they buried his brother, that's not a small thing. That's everything. Brett's dad sat across from me and I could see him studying me. Not in a hostile way, in a careful way. The same way Brett studies things. The same way Brett examines a design before he commits to it. His father was looking at me and deciding, silently, internally, in the private language of their family, whether I was worth his son's heart. I looked him in the eye and I said, I will love him the way he deserves to be loved. I said it with my whole chest because that's how I say everything. And his dad, this man who doesn't say the words, who communicates through presence and action and the quiet fact of showing up, he looked at me and he said, You have my blessing. 4 words from a man who doesn't waste them, and they meant more to me than any speech. Brett and I walked out of that room and I held his hand and I thought about the life we were building. 2 families, 2 languages of love, 2 ways of being in the world that were different enough to challenge each other and similar enough to hold each other up. He was learning to say it from me, and I was learning to hear it, even when it wasn't said, from him. Chapter 16. The Pants. I need to talk about the pants, and I need to talk about the suit, and I need to talk about what really happened behind the scenes on my wedding day, because the version you saw edited for television was not the full story. It's my wedding day, the most important day of my life, and I'm standing in a room with my groomsmen and a tailor and a suit that does not fit the way it's supposed to fit. Let me back up. The suit that was originally made for me, my wedding suit, the one I'd been approving pictures of for weeks, came in as a size 4XL. 4XL. I am not a 4XL. I've never been a 4XL in my life. I don't know if it was a vendor mistake or a sizing miscommunication or what, but when the suit showed up, it was big enough to fit me and 2 other grown men. I tried it on and I looked like a kid wearing his father's clothes, so I did what anybody would do. I went to the producers. I said, This isn't going to work. I cannot walk down an aisle in this suit. I cannot stand at an altar and say vows to my wife in a suit that I could fit another body inside. There has to be a backup. They figured it out. They had to scramble, but they figured it out. The white suit you see me in on the show, that was a backup. That wasn't the original plan. That was the plan we made at the last minute, because the original plan failed. I know how this looked on camera. I know people watched me stress about the tailoring and thought, it's just pants. Relax. Get married. Who cares how the cuffs fall? And I understand that perspective. I do. But here's what people who aren't designers don't understand. For someone like me, the visual matters. Not because I'm vain, because it's how I express care. I designed footwear for a living. I spent 10 years in video games making pixels look perfect. My apartment is organized by color. My shoe collection is curated. My hair, which would later become blonde, and yes, I'm aware of the comments. My hair is something I've experimented with my entire life because creative expression is as natural to me as breathing. I've had dreads, braids, an afro, a brush cut, straight hair. My brother once said I looked like Wesley Snipes' vampire phase. I'm a man who cares about how things look, because how things look is how I communicate. So when I'm standing in front of a mirror on my wedding day and the backup suit doesn't sit right, the cuffs aren't breaking where they should, the silhouette is off, the proportions are wrong, that's not me being dramatic. That's me caring about the most important visual presentation of my life. I want to stand at that altar looking like the man Tiffany deserves to see walking toward her. I want the photos to reflect the gravity of what we're doing. I want every detail to matter, because this moment matters. My brother, my living brother who was there with me, gave me that look, the look that says you're being too much right now, and I got frustrated with him. I did, because we have different values when it comes to these things, and that's okay. But on my wedding day, I needed someone to match my energy, not talk me down from it. Did I snap? Yeah, a little. Was I proud of that? No. But I'll tell you what, watching it back later, I didn't regret caring about the pants. I regretted the sharpness I showed my brother, the frustration that leaked out sideways, because the real emotion underneath it wasn't about tailoring. It was about wanting everything to be perfect for a day I never thought I'd have. Because there was a time, after my other brother's funeral, after the years of quiet grief, after the dating that went nowhere and the relationships that didn't stick, there was a time when I wondered if this day would ever come, if I'd ever stand in a room putting on a suit for my own wedding. And now, it was here. And the first suit was 4XL, and the backup wasn't sitting right. And I was losing it a little because I wanted it to be perfect for her. The tailor fixed them. They looked better, infinitely better. I made it to the altar on time. Marshall was there in the crowd, my boy from the show, and seeing him gave me a boost. The groomsmen were sharp. The venue was beautiful. And then I saw her, Tiffany, in white, walking toward me with that smile, the one that takes up her whole face, the one that makes everyone around her happier just by being in its radius. And I forgot about the pants. I forgot about every logistical headache and every alteration and every moment of stress, because the only thing that mattered was standing at that end of the aisle, and she was walking toward me, and I was about to say the words that would change both of our lives forever. Chapter 17. It wasn't physical. I'm going to tell you about the vows, but first I need to tell you about the morning. My girls were with me, getting ready, doing what women do before weddings, fixing hair, fixing makeup, telling each other they look beautiful, crying, stopping crying, fixing the makeup again, music playing, champagne flowing. The energy in that room was pure love, and I soaked it up like I was storing it for later. My mom was there, and my mother is a complicated, wonderful, opinionated, loving woman who had opinions about this entire process from the beginning. She'd said things in front of the cameras that made me raise an eyebrow. Things about not expecting me to ever do this. Things that, if you heard them out of context, might sound unsupportive. But that's my mama. She says what's on her mind, always has. I looked at her across the room and I saw something underneath the opinions. Pride, fear, love so big it came out sideways as criticism because she didn't know how else to hold it. She'd raised me to be strong, independent, a woman who didn't need anyone. And here I was about to give my whole heart to a man she'd barely met. Of course she was scared, but she was there. That's the thing. She was there. I thought about my grandma and grandpa. They got married after 6 weeks of knowing each other. 6 weeks. And they stayed together for over 60 years. More than 60 years of marriage built on a 6-week foundation. People act like what we did on Love is Blind was crazy, like falling in love in a matter of days is reckless and irresponsible. My grandparents did it without a TV show, without pods, without producers and cameras. They just looked at each other and decided, "You're my person. Let's go." That's in my blood. That willingness to bet on love even when the odds look insane. That faith that you can know someone in your bones before your brain has finished running the math. I walked down that aisle believing. I walked down it the way I walk into everything, fully, loudly, unapologetically. My dress was beautiful, white, elegant, royal. I felt like a queen, and I carried myself like one. And when I got to the altar and looked at Brett, this quiet, careful, beautifully dressed man who had listened to me through a wall and caught me when I fell asleep and redesigned his entire emotional vocabulary, because loving me required it. When I looked at him, the words just came. It wasn't a physical thing. It was simply how you spoke to my soul. That's what I said in my vows, and that's the truest summary of everything we'd been through. Our love wasn't born from attraction, though the attraction is very much there. It wasn't born from proximity or convenience or the manufactured intensity of a TV show. It was born from conversation, from vulnerability, from two voices on opposite sides of a wall, finding each other in the dark. He spoke to my soul. That's not poetry, it's fact. In a world that's constantly loud, Brett's voice was the first thing that ever made me feel quiet inside, settled, at peace. I cried. Of course I cried. I'm Tiffany. I cry when I'm happy, sad, stressed, overwhelmed, grateful, and watching commercials about puppies finding their way home. I cry because I'm alive, and because feeling things is the whole point of being alive. And then it was his turn. Chapter 18. I will. I was not going to cry. That was the plan. Stand there, be composed, say my vows, mean them, don't cry. The plan lasted about 30 seconds. She walked toward me and I felt everything I'd been holding back, everything I'd processed and filed and organized in the neat little compartments of my mind. All of it rushed to the surface at once, like a dam breaking, like a building coming down, like every emotion I'd been too careful to express, suddenly demanding to be felt. She was beautiful. That goes without saying, but I'm saying it anyway because it matters. She was stunning in that dress, and the way she moved, confident, joyful, present, it reminded me of why I fell in love with her. Not because she was trying to impress me, because she was completely, unwaveringly herself. My vows were simple. I'm not a man of many words, and the words I choose matter to me more than the quantity. I told her she was a beautiful person inside and out, and that's why I fell in love with her. I told her that meeting her changed me in ways I was still understanding. I told her that I saw a future with her that was clear and certain and good. And then they asked us the question, "Do you take this man to be your wedded husband?" "I absolutely will." That's what she said. Not "I do" or "I will." I absolutely will. Because Tiffany doesn't do anything halfway. She couldn't just agree to marry me. She had to agree emphatically, with her whole chest, with that extra word that turned a promise into a declaration. When they asked me, I kept it simple. I definitely will. We were married, husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Brown. And the room erupted. Our friends, our families, the crew that had watched us from the pods to the altar, everyone who'd been holding their breath since the nap incident, everyone who'd been rooting for the quiet guy and the loud girl to make it. We made it. The ring went on my finger and I looked at it and I thought about the shoe in the box, the little shoe I designed years ago that represented my beginning. And now, here was a ring, a circle, a closed loop, a perfect design that represented the next beginning, the biggest one. I kissed my wife in front of everyone. And for a man who isn't comfortable with public displays of emotion, who processes internally and communicates through action, who had to learn a new language of love just to get to this moment, for that man, kissing his wife at the altar was the loudest thing I'd ever said. Chapter 19. The Year Between. Here's the part of Love is Blind nobody warns you about, the year between. We got married at the altar. That part you saw. The reveal, the proposals, the wedding. That's the whole show. And then the cameras stop rolling and you go home and the world goes on like nothing happened. Because from the world's perspective, nothing has. You're not on TV yet. Your season hasn't aired yet. You're legally married to a person you met on a show that nobody has seen. You are, for about a year, a secret. That was the hardest year. Not because our relationship was hard. Our relationship was actually, finally, sort of stable. We were living together. We were building routines. We were learning how one person's regimented life gels with another person's free-flowing one. The work of marriage, the actual work, we were doing it. But we were doing it in silence because we'd signed paperwork that said we couldn't tell anyone, not our coworkers, not our extended families in some cases, not the barista at our coffee shop, not anyone who hadn't already been in the small inner circle that flew to Mexico with us or stood at our altar. That's a weird thing to do to a human being. You tell them they are married, and also that they cannot say they are married. I ran into women I'd gone on dates with before the show. Portland is small. You do. And they'd ask me how I was doing and what was new, and I'd have to smile and say, "Oh, nothing. Same stuff." Meanwhile, my entire life had changed. I'd fallen in love through a wall. I'd proposed. I'd gotten married. I had a wife. And I couldn't say any of that. I had to play the version of me I'd been 6 months before, like a guy doing an imitation of his own past. Tiffany had it worse. She'd left her entire city. Her friends in Seattle knew she was gone, but not why. Her coworkers at the time knew she was leaving, but not for whom. Her mom knew, obviously. Mothers always know. But there were cousins. There were friends from college. There were people on the outer rings of her life who she simply could not tell. She was carrying a secret that weighed about as much as a whole other person. We watched the season together when it finally aired. That's the other thing people don't talk about. You watch your own love story like a movie. You know how it ends. You've lived it. But you've never seen the footage. You've never seen yourself the way they edited you. You've never heard the voiceovers they put over your facial expressions. You've never seen the scenes you weren't in, the scenes your now wife had with other men, or the scenes other couples had that explain why a moment at the altar happened the way it happened. The first time I watched myself cry at the altar, I watched it 3 times in a row. Not because I was vain, because I was trying to process who the man on the screen was versus who I remembered being in the moment. The camera sees something different than the person does. The camera saw a guy in a white suit with tears on his face and a wife walking toward him. I remembered the suit problem, the nerves, the way my hands felt, the thing my brother had said 5 minutes earlier. Same moment, different experiences. We watched it with our families. We watched some of it with our close friends. We watched some of it together, just the 2 of us, on the couch in the apartment, so we could pause and talk and react without a room full of reactions pulling us in different directions. Then the world saw it, all at once, episodes dropping weekly, reactions flooding in, people who had never met us having whole opinions about our marriage, people who had formed a parasocial relationship with us over the course of 10 episodes, suddenly DMing us like old friends, or strangers telling us we were their favorite couple, or strangers telling us we weren't going to make it, or strangers telling us the nap was a deal breaker, or that my brother was annoying, or that Tiffany should have married someone else entirely. You cannot be prepared for that. No amount of media training prepares you for the moment when your wife becomes a meme and you become a headline. What saved us was the foundation we built during the year we couldn't talk about it, because we had spent an entire year becoming a real married couple in private. By the time the public finally got let in, they couldn't shake us. They could say whatever they wanted. The truth of us had already been built. The edits didn't define us because we knew who we were behind the edits. That year was lonely. That year was strange. That year was where we actually became us. I'm grateful for it now. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I'm grateful for it. Chapter 20. Portland. The show ended and real life began, and real life, it turns out, is a lot harder than a villa in Mexico or a pod with soft lighting. I moved to Portland. That sentence doesn't contain the weight of what it actually meant. I left Seattle, my city, my friends, my community, my routines, my life, and I moved to a city where the only person I knew was the man I'd married on television. A city that's 3 hours south of everything I'd built, which is close enough that you can still visit, but far enough that your daily life is completely different. The first year was rough. I'll be honest about that. I didn't have my people. Brett was at work. This man goes to Nike every day and designs things that end up on the feet of millions of people. So he's not exactly sitting at home waiting for me to get bored, and the show hadn't aired yet, so I couldn't even tell anyone why I was there. I was this mysterious new girl in Portland with no friends, no job in the city yet, and a wedding ring that nobody knew the story behind. We'd agreed to keep things quiet. That in-between time, after filming, before airing, Brett was very clear that it mattered. He said, "Nobody needs to know. We build our foundation first. We figure out who we are as a married couple before the world gets a vote." He was right. I know that now. That quiet time was the most important time of our relationship, even though it was the loneliest time for me personally, because we were doing the work that most couples don't get to do in private, learning each other's rhythms, figuring out who takes out the trash and who cooks dinner and who falls asleep first on the couch, which for the record is still me. Some of Brett's friends gave us looks. Who's this new girl? They hadn't seen me before. I didn't live here, and Brett wasn't offering explanations because we were keeping it under wraps. I'm sure the rumors were interesting. But here's what saved me in that first year. I'm not a woman who waits for things to happen. I make them happen. That's the Houston in me. That's the woman who played the instrument nobody expected because it was too girly to play the flute. I looked at Portland and I said, "Okay, this is my city now. I need to find my people." I found dance, bachata, salsa, the Latin social dance scene in Portland. It wasn't what I had in Houston, where the community was huge and diverse and everywhere. In the Pacific Northwest, I had to look for it, but I found it. I took lessons. I joined a ladies' team, and before I knew it, I had a community that was mine. Not Brett's, mine. And I was performing at the Las Vegas Salsa Congress and feeling more like myself than I had since the move. Brett was my biggest cheerleader. He came to my performances with his camera and a super long lens, capturing content like it was his job. He never tried to join in. Boxing is his thing, dance is mine, and we respect each other's separate pursuits. But he was there, every time, watching me from the audience with that quiet pride that he expresses not through words, but through showing up. That's how I knew the marriage was going to work. Not because we never fought, we did. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. But because even in the hard moments, even in the lonely first year, even when I missed Seattle so much I could feel it in my chest, Brett was there, present, steady, the kind of man who doesn't need to say "I love you" every day, because he says it by learning how your coffee machine works, by making room in his pristine closet for your chaotic wardrobe, by driving you to the airport at 5 a.m. without complaint. He said something once that stuck with me. When one of us is struggling, the other one is strong. We take turns. We don't both break at the same time. That became our rule, our foundation, the thing that holds us together when the world tries to shake us loose. Chapter 21. Just show up. I want to talk about community, because a lot of people asked us how we built one in Portland after the show aired, how we dealt with the friends who stayed, the friends who changed, the strangers who suddenly felt like they knew us, the way the city got smaller and bigger at the same time. The short answer is the one my dad always gave me. Just show up. Portland is a small city. I said it on a podcast once, and I'll say it in this book. I don't think there could ever be a Love is Blind in Portland. It's too small. The dating pool is too shallow. Everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. You see the same faces at the same coffee shops. You run into exes at the same grocery stores. The whole casting premise of strangers behind a wall collapses in a city where 6 degrees of separation might be 2. That smallness cuts both ways. It makes dating hard. It makes friendship intimate. Once you're in with a group in Portland, you're in. The friends I have here are people I've been seeing at the same gym, the same coffee shop, the same barber for years. They knew me before Nike. They knew me before Love is Blind. And they're the same people now that the show is over as they were before the show happened. That's not an accident. That's because I showed up for years, consistently, quietly. I showed up at the gym. I showed up at cookouts. I showed up at birthdays. I showed up at funerals. I'm not a phone guy. I'm not a group text guy. I'm the guy who drives across town to be in the room. That's the currency. That's how you build a tribe. When the show aired, something happened that I didn't fully anticipate. Some people changed, not my close friends, not the ones I'd been showing up for, but the outer ring, the acquaintances. Some of them got weird. Some of them wanted pictures. Some of them wanted a connection they hadn't earned. Some of them also disappeared, like suddenly knowing a guy from a reality show felt like too much. I learned fast who my day ones were, my actual day ones, the friends who, when I pulled up at the cookout, acted exactly the way they'd acted when I pulled up 3 years earlier. Same jokes, same energy, same teasing about me being quiet in particular. Nothing about how I'd been on TV, nothing about the DMs, nothing about what people were saying online. That's a gift. That's a specific kind of love. We also had a wave of people who doubted the marriage publicly. I'll name it. We had podcasters and commentators and reactor folks and social media types who, the moment the show finished airing, started asking on camera how long they thought Brett and Tiffany would last. They pointed at the nap. They pointed at the suit. They pointed at the fact that we were older, that we were quieter, that we weren't as dramatic as some of the other couples, as if being undramatic was a flaw instead of the entire plot. The season 6 reunion aired and Clay came out with a bouquet of flowers for his season's couple. It was a sweet moment. I watched it with Tiffany, and we had this quiet look between us like we didn't need flowers from anyone. We'd already handed ours to each other at the altar. But the whole public conversation around which couples are still together, which couples aren't, who's going to make it, got so loud around that time, so public, so transactional. I remember thinking, we're not a stock. We're not a position people should be trading. We're a marriage. Here's what we did. We kept showing up for each other, for our friends, for our families. I kept going to the gym. Tiffany kept going to dance. We kept cooking dinner. We kept traveling. We kept doing the unsexy work of being married after the cameras turned off. And something funny happened. The doubters got quiet. Not all of them. Some of them are always going to stay loud because loud is their job. But the ones who were genuinely curious, they settled down. Because a marriage that keeps going is the most boring thing in the world to cover. There's no content in it. There's no arc. There's just two people in a house in Beaverton arguing about the thermostat and agreeing on the coffee. My parents have been married over 40 years. My mom and my dad. I grew up watching what that looks like. What the decade after decade of it looks like. It doesn't look like a reunion special. It looks like a dad building a porch on a Saturday while a mom brings him water without being asked. It looks like them finishing each other's sentences at Thanksgiving. It looks like a silence at the dinner table that's comfortable instead of tense. That's the marriage I'm aiming for. That's the long game I'm playing. Just show up. For your people, for your person, for the life you said you wanted. The rest will take care of itself. Chapter 22. The Quiet. Our house is quiet in the mornings. That's my favorite thing about our life together. Tiffany doesn't understand this about me, and I'm not sure she ever fully will. She wakes up with energy. Immediate, combustible energy. She's texting people, playing music, having ideas, deciding on a whim to drive to Vancouver, Washington. Without telling me until she's already in the car, I wake up slowly. I need the quiet. I need to let my brain boot up like one of those old computers that takes a while to load the operating system. I'm regimented. I'll just say it. I am a creature of routine in ways that probably drive my wife crazy. I'm out the door by about 9:30 in the morning. I'm at work. I come home around 4:30. I change clothes and I go straight to the gym. I come home from the gym. I shower. I eat. I either write or I sit with my wife on the couch and we watch something. Then I read a little. And then I sleep, every weekday, basically forever. Tiffany is the opposite. She flows with the day. The day tells her what it needs. She might wake up and decide the day is a beach day. She might wake up and decide the day is a 10-mile bike ride day. She might wake up and decide the day calls for 3 hours of phone calls and 2 hours of dance practice and then dinner somewhere we've never been. I genuinely do not know what Tiffany's Saturday will look like until Tiffany lives it. We've had to learn each other's tempos. Early on, I'd come home from work and find plans I hadn't agreed to. She'd come home from a trip and find that I'd reorganized a closet without asking. We had to figure out how to be a regimented person and a free-spirited person who share a house and a last name. It took time. It took conflict. It took us sitting down with actual conversation and saying, here's how I move through the world, and here's why. And here's what I need from you. Her conflict style is slow. That surprised me at first. Here's this woman who's emotional and expressive and quick to feel, and when we actually have a disagreement, she needs time. She needs to go somewhere. She needs to digest. She doesn't want to speak from the emotion of the moment because she knows she'll say something she doesn't mean. My conflict style is also slow, but for different reasons. I need to process. She needs to cool. And we figured out that we both have to give the other the space we need before we come back and have the actual conversation. That sounds simple. It is not simple. It's one of the hardest things we've learned. Two slow conflict processors living in the same house can stretch an argument over days if you're not careful. We had to build a rule. Whatever it is, we talk about it before we go to sleep. Not necessarily resolve it, not necessarily solve it, but acknowledge it, name it. Let the other person know we see it and we're coming back to it. Then we come back to it in the morning when we've both slept on it, and we talk about it with calm heads. That rule has saved us more times than I can count. We bought a house, our first house, first for both of us. That feels like something that should be stated simply because it is simple, even though the process of buying a house together is anything but. We closed in September of 2024, a place in Beaverton, which is its own small suburb just west of Portland proper, which is where I'd been living and working for years. It's near Nike. It's got the neighborhood feel Tiffany wanted, and the quiet I needed. There were the negotiations, the inspections, the moment where you sign papers, and suddenly you're financially responsible for a building and the land it sits on. But underneath all of that logistical noise was a truth that felt bigger. We were building something permanent. I've built a lot of things in my life. Video games that people played and forgot, shoes that people wore and retired, careers that evolved and shifted. But a house with the woman you love, in the city you chose together, with rooms that still need furniture and a backyard that still needs landscaping. That's different. That's not a product or a project. That's a home. The shoe wall expanded. Tiffany rolls her eyes about it, but she doesn't actually mind. I think she finds it endearing in the way that spouses find each other's obsessions endearing when they've stopped trying to change them. She'll walk past the wall and say, "Would you notice if some of these went missing?" And I'll say, yes, because I would. Every pair has a story. Every pair represents a moment in my creative journey. They're not just shoes, they're a timeline. She has her own space too. That was important to both of us, that even inside a shared home, we maintained ourselves. She has her dance life. I have my boxing. She has her friends that aren't my friends, people she found in Portland on her own, through her own effort, who know her as Tiffany, not as Brett's wife from Love is Blind. I have mine. We overlap when we want to, and we separate when we need to, and we never make the other person feel guilty for needing space. I'm a self-proclaimed introvert. Nobody who only saw the show would know that. On camera, I look composed. I look present. I look engaged. That takes energy for me. A room of people drains me. I go home after a long day of work, and the idea of also going to a dinner with 10 other adults, I don't know, well, genuinely exhausts me on a cellular level. Tiffany gets filled up by people. I get filled up by quiet. That's a math problem we've been solving since we started living together. We do it mostly by saying yes to different things. She goes to the thing. I stay home. Or I go to the thing for an hour and then leave. Or we both go and we have a signal for when I've hit my limit. I started writing. A screenplay. I'm not going to tell you what it's about because I'm not at a point where I feel comfortable sharing it. Tiffany says I'm a creative person, and she's right. But creativity requires privacy. It requires a room where the door is closed and the thoughts can be messy before they become something presentable. She gives me that. She goes to bed early, always early, sometimes startlingly early. And I go to my room and I put thoughts on paper and I let the story be whatever it wants to be without worrying about whether it's good enough yet. I've been at this for over 6 months now. Nobody's read it yet. Not Tiffany. Not my brother. Not my friends. Maybe someday. I don't have any on-screen ambitions. I like being behind the lens and behind the scenes. But I do aspire to direct and write and produce. If this screenplay ends up being the thing that opens that door, great. If it ends up being a draft I never show anyone, that's also fine. The writing has changed how I think. That's the actual value. That's what our marriage looks like, not the grand gestures, though there are those. Not the travel, though there's plenty of that. Not the Instagram posts or the fan encounters or the public representation of Black love, though we take that responsibility seriously. Our marriage looks like quiet mornings and late nights, like a woman who falls asleep on the couch at 9:30. She disputes this number, but I'm the one who's awake to witness it. And a man who designs things in the next room, like a shoe wall and a dance practice and a screenplay that might never see the light of day, but matters, because the act of creating it is enough. It looks like two people who learn to speak each other's language. Mine is quiet and visual, and built from design principles. Hers is loud and verbal, and built from a lifetime of being exactly who she is without apology. And somewhere in the space between those two languages, we found a dialect that belongs only to us. Chapter 23. Black Love. People stop us everywhere we go. In Portland, in LA, in New York, in Tokyo. I will never forget the girl in Japan who came up to Brett on a street corner, starstruck, telling him she followed our story from the other side of the world. In Japan, 2 years after the show aired, on a random street corner. I think about that moment a lot, because when we walked into Love is Blind, we weren't thinking about representation. We were thinking about love. We were two Black people in our mid-30s who were tired of being single and brave enough to try something unconventional to find our person. We weren't on a mission to represent anything. We were on a mission to find each other. But the world decided we meant something more, and I understand why. Because on a show where drama sells and dysfunction draws ratings, we were the couple that chose communication over conflict. We were the couple where the man held space for his woman's stress instead of making it about himself, where the woman validated her man's grief instead of redirecting the conversation, where both people said, "I will" at the altar with zero hesitation and zero doubt. We were Black love, not the hashtag, the actual thing. Two dark-skinned Black people choosing each other, lifting each other, navigating the world together in a way that felt like the thing people had been praying to see on their screens. And for Black folks watching, it was more than a love story. It was a mirror. It was proof. Because if you grew up Black in America, you have sat through decades of TV where Black love was either absent, broken, or served up as a punchline. You've watched Black men on dating shows be reduced to swagger, to aggression, to a performance of masculinity that had nothing to do with the Black men in your actual life. You've watched Black women on dating shows be cast as the loud one, the angry one, the problem. And every time some little part of you would sit there thinking, that's not us. That's not how we love. That's not what my parents showed me. That's not what my grandparents modeled. That's not what the aunties and uncles at the cookout sound like when they're teasing each other after 30 years. The fans told us as much. Thank you for not being the drama. Thank you for not playing into the stereotypes. Thank you for showing us what it actually looks like. And Brett, who didn't really watch reality TV before this, who didn't have a frame of reference for what representation on dating shows typically looked like. He was moved by it in a way that I found beautiful. He said, I didn't realize how much it mattered to people until they told me. And then I realized we were just being ourselves. And that's what they needed to see. Just being ourselves. That's the whole secret. We didn't perform health for the cameras. We didn't manufacture green flags. We just showed up as who we were, a thoughtful man and an emotional woman who happened to communicate really well. And the world was so hungry for that normalcy that they turned it into something extraordinary. There's a pressure that comes with being a public black couple that I want to name, because nobody really talks about it. Every time you post a picture, people are watching. Every time you go to an event, people are asking whether the marriage is still solid. Every time a Love is Blind couple somewhere announces a divorce or a split, somebody in our DMs asks us how we're doing, like the failure of somebody else's marriage is a test of ours. We felt that pressure, especially in the beginning. We felt the weight of trying to maintain what people were calling the perfect couple image. And we had to decide, consciously and together, that we weren't going to live our marriage for the public. We weren't doing anything for the cameras or the public pressure. Whatever we post is for us. Whatever we celebrate is for us. The marriage is for us. I think about the couples from our season. 3 of us are still together. That's remarkable. Marshall and Jacquelina, Kwame and Chelsea, Brett and me. 3 couples from one season who are still doing the work, still showing up, still married. That doesn't happen by accident. And I think it happened because our season had something different. We were older, more mature, more emotionally available. The men of that season, and I'll give them credit publicly because they deserve it, were grown. They handled themselves with respect. They communicated. They showed vulnerability when vulnerability was needed. That matters, especially for Black men on television who so rarely get to be soft, to be emotional, to say things like, your reservations are valid, and I see the future so clearly with you. The culture doesn't hand our men a lot of room to sit down and cry, or to hold space for a woman's stress without trying to fix it or dismiss it. Our men are raised to carry, to provide, to be steady, which are beautiful things, necessary things. But the softer registers get stripped away early, sometimes before they've even fully formed. Brett didn't just love me well on that show. He loved me in a way that gave other Black men permission to love well, too. Little Black boys saw him. Grown Black men messaged him. That's legacy. That's the legacy. Not the nap, not the bougie apartment, not the shoe wall. The legacy is that 2 people proved you could find forever on a reality dating show if you showed up with intention, communicated honestly, and chose each other over and over and over again, even when she falls asleep on you. Chapter 24. The next chapter. We're not slowing down anytime soon. That's the honest truth. Tiffany wants to go everywhere, and I've learned, 3 years in, that when this woman has an idea, you either get on board or get out of the way. She'll wake up while I'm still sleeping and decide to drive to the beach. She'll book a trip to Cabo and tell me about it later. She'll look at me over breakfast and say, "I think we should go to Tokyo," and 3 weeks later we're in Shinjuku, eating ramen at midnight. Japan was one of our trips. We went for our second anniversary, actually for her birthday, which is right around the time of our anniversary. So we made a whole thing of it. We ate food that doesn't exist in America. We got lost in districts neither of us knew how to pronounce. We took pictures with my camera instead of our phones because I wanted real pictures, the kind you print. I still have those pictures. Colombia was another one. We went early in our marriage, and it cracked something open in Tiffany. Her bachata is Colombian-rooted. Her dance community is full of people who've come from there. And being in the country where the music lives was a whole thing for her. I watched her dance with strangers in a plaza, and I thought, this is what I married. This woman who can find her joy in a language she doesn't fully speak. Our honeymoon, by the way, happened later, not right after the wedding, because we got married on the show, and that whole week was the opposite of a honeymoon. Cameras, producers, families, logistics. We wanted a real one, a proper one. So later that year, we took ourselves to Mexico. Different part of Mexico than the villa, private, quiet. And on one specific night, Brett had arranged something I'm going to tell you about, because it's too good not to put in a book. He walked me along a path, rose petals on the ground, a walkway lit by candles or small lanterns. I honestly can't remember because I was too stunned to take notes. At the end of the walkway was a table, a chef, a private dinner on the beach. He hadn't told me what we were walking toward. He just said, "Come with me." And I walked and I turned a corner and there it was. This man, this quiet man, who doesn't make speeches, who doesn't buy showy gifts, who communicates mostly through presence, had built this entire romantic setup for me. He had designed a night, because designing is how he loves. I cried, obviously. I'm Tiffany. I cry at commercials. We love to travel. We have a lot of trips ahead of us. That's the current chapter, traveling, enjoying the house we've built, deepening the friendships we have, settling into the kind of marriage that doesn't need an audience to feel complete. People ask us about kids. I want to address that directly, because the question comes up in every interview and on every podcast and in every DM. As I'm writing this, we don't have children. That might change someday. It might not. We're married, we're traveling, we're settling into our first home, and we're choosing the pace of our life on purpose. What we have talked about is a puppy. Tiffany wants one. She wants a Rottweiler specifically, because she's that kind of woman. I want a German Shepherd because I'm that kind of man. We will probably end up with both because neither of us is great at compromise when it comes to things we're passionate about. The house still needs work, rooms to furnish, a backyard to landscape. We debate about it the way we debate about everything, with love and humor and an underlying certainty that whatever we decide, we're deciding it together. She wants me to put my shoe collection in a museum-style display. I want to design something custom, a creative installation that tells a story, not just a wall of boxes, because everything I do with intention. That's never going to change. Her bachata is evolving. She performed at the Las Vegas Salsa Congress and came home glowing like she'd just won a championship. And in a way she had. She'd set a goal, committed to the practice, showed up on the biggest stage and nailed it. I stood in the audience with my camera, capturing every moment, thinking, this is my wife, this woman who moves like that, who carries herself like that, who decided she wanted something and went after it with the same energy she brought to those pods. My writing continues, quietly, in the room where the door is closed and the thoughts can be messy. I'm not ready to share what it is, not the genre, not the premise, not even the format. Tiffany tells people I'm working on a screenplay, and they ask questions, and I dodge them because the work is still too new to be examined. But I'll say this, being married to someone who believes in you, who says keep writing even when you haven't shown her a single page, who creates space for you to be creative without demanding to see the product. That's the kind of support that makes artists out of people who might otherwise just be dreamers. We're growing, not dramatically, not with the kind of explosive growth that makes for good television. Slowly, steadily, the way plants grow, imperceptibly day to day, but undeniably over time. We communicate better than we did in year one. We argue less. We laugh more. We found the rhythm that long-term relationships require, the one where you stop trying to change each other and start appreciating the differences that make your life richer. For our second anniversary, Tiffany posted a picture of us and wrote something that made the whole internet cry. Imperfectly perfect for each other. That's what she called us. And she said something else that I keep coming back to. Communication hasn't always been easy, but we keep encouraging each other's passions. That's the whole marriage. Two people who aren't perfect, who aren't trying to be perfect, who agreed a long time ago that the way through is to keep talking and keep cheering each other on. Brett and Tiffany from Love is Blind Season 4 are still together, still married, still in love, not because love is easy, because it isn't, because we chose each other, and we keep choosing each other every single day. That's not a fairy tale. That's better than a fairy tale. That's real. Chapter 25. Know who you are. People ask us for advice. Future Love is Blind contestants, couples who watched our season, people in relationships who want to know the secret. There isn't a secret. But if I had to distill what we've learned into something useful, it would be this. Know who you are. That's it. That's the whole thing. Know who you are before the show. Know who you are before the cameras start rolling and the producers start editing and the internet starts having opinions about your relationship. Know what you value. Know what you won't compromise. Know where your boundaries are, and don't let anyone, not a TV show, not a social media comment, not even the person you love, push you past them. Brett knew who he was when he walked into those pods, a designer, a quiet man, a man who processes before he speaks, a man who lost his brother and learned to take life seriously, a man who was dating with intention. He didn't change any of that for the cameras. He didn't become louder or more dramatic or more entertaining. He was just Brett, and the world fell in love with him because of it. I knew who I was, a woman from Houston who doesn't apologize for being emotional, a woman who says I love you first because life is too short to wait for someone else to be brave, a woman whose confidence isn't arrogance, it's armor. I went into those pods as myself, and I came out as myself, and the only thing that changed was that I had a husband. The time between filming and airing, that's the time that tests you. Because the world is about to have opinions. The edits are going to shape a narrative. People who've never met you are going to decide who you are, based on 45 minutes of footage spread across 10 episodes. And if you don't know who you are before that happens, the world will tell you, and you might start to believe them. Brett said something during that time that I've carried with me. He said, "If external noise creates a problem between us, we need to stop and ask ourselves what we're really dealing with. Is this an internal problem, something between us, or is it external? And if it's external, we can't let it become internal." That's wisdom. That's the kind of thing a therapist charges $200 an hour to teach you. And my husband said it for free over breakfast on a Tuesday. Don't let the comments define your relationship. Don't let the DMs plant seeds of doubt. Don't let the opinions of people who don't know you override the knowing of the person who does. And for the love of God, don't become a full-time influencer unless that's what you actually want to do. Brett still works at Nike. I still have my career. We still have lives that exist outside of the love is blind ecosystem. That grounding, that connection to who we were before the show, is what kept us sane when the world got loud. Keep some things to yourself. That's the other piece of advice I always give. Not everything needs to be shared. Build a foundation that's strong enough to hold the weight of public scrutiny, and then let the public see the parts you choose to show them. The rest is yours. We chose to show the world what healthy love looks like. Not perfect love, healthy love. The kind with communication and grace, and the willingness to talk through things instead of blowing them up. The kind where your partner is your biggest cheerleader, and your safe space and your best friend and the person you want to tell first when something happens, good or bad. That's what we have after 3 years, after the pods and the nap and the reveal and the wedding and Portland and the quiet mornings and the spontaneous trips and the shoe wall and the bachata and the house and the life. We have each other, and we keep choosing each other every day. Chapter 26. Now and Forever. We toasted at our wedding to now and forever. That's what we said, now and forever. Now feels like a house in Beaverton with rooms that still need furniture. Now feels like a Sunday morning where I'm sleeping until 8:30, and she's been awake since dawn, probably already texting someone or planning a trip or doing something spontaneous that I'll hear about later. Now feels like a shoe wall that's outgrowing its space, and a dance practice schedule that keeps us both busy, and a screenplay that I'm writing in secret, and a husband who still surprises me with quiet kindnesses that he'll never post about online. Now is good. Now is really good. But forever. Forever is the word that matters. Because forever isn't a destination. It's a decision. It's a thing you choose to keep choosing, even when the choosing gets hard. Even when you've been married for 3 years and the butterflies have been replaced by bath mats and budget discussions. Even when the world that fell in love with you on television has mostly moved on to the next season. We haven't moved on. We're still right here, still building. There's something Brett said to me once that I come back to when things feel heavy. We were lying in bed, me about to fall asleep at my typically early hour, him probably going to be up for another 3 hours designing or writing or whatever he does in that beautiful mind of his. And he said, I want you to wake up every day and not have to ask me if I'm into you. I want you to know. That's what he gives me, every day. Not with grand declarations or Instagram captions or public displays, with the quiet, consistent, immovable fact of his presence, with the way he makes room for me in a life that was perfectly organized before I arrived and doesn't seem to mind that I've rearranged everything, with the way he holds me when I'm stressed and says nothing because sometimes nothing is the right thing to say. And what I give him is the opposite of nothing. I give him everything, all the words his family never said, all the affirmation he never knew he needed until I started giving it to him, all the spontaneity and chaos and emotion and volume that makes his quiet life louder and fuller and messier and better. We're not perfect. We never claim to be. We argue about the thermostat and the timeline for getting a dog and whether 9:30 is too early to go to bed. It's not, for the record, no matter what he says. We have different communication styles that sometimes collide. He processes internally, and I process out loud, and sometimes that means I'm 3 conversations ahead of him before he's finished thinking about the first one. But we figure it out. We always figure it out, because at the end of every disagreement, every misunderstanding, every moment of friction, we come back to the same place. You're my person. I chose you. I keep choosing you, now and forever. It's not just a toast. That's a promise. The kind you make with your whole chest, with your eyes wide open, with the full understanding of what you're signing up for. The mundane and the magical, the bougie and the chaotic, the quiet mornings and the spontaneous road trips, the shoe wall and the crawfish étouffée, the Nike director and the bachata queen, the man who doesn't say it and the woman who won't stop saying it. Mr. and Mrs. Brown, Season 4. Still here, still in love, still proving every single day that love is blind and marriage is a choice, and the best choices are the ones you make with intention. I absolutely will. I definitely will. Epilogue. 3 couples. That's what Season 4 gave us. Brett and Tiffany, Marshall and Jacquelina, Kwame and Chelsea. 3 couples from one season who said yes at the altar and meant it. Not just for the cameras, not just for the moment, but for the long, unglamorous, beautiful work of building a life together. I want to tell you why I chose this story, because the choosing matters. Every book I write is a vote. Every couple I sit with is me saying, this one, this is the story I want on the shelf. This is the version of love I want read. The shelf didn't always have couples like these on it. Not like this. Not in their own words, with their own rhythms, with the aunties and the cookouts and the Sunday phone calls intact. When I started Books by Barron, the mission was simple. Give real people authorship over their own narratives. Not the edited version, not the highlight reel, not the producer's cut. The real version, messy and honest, and full of the moments that happen off camera, which are always the moments that matter most. A.D. and Ollie's story was about redemption, 2 altar rejections that led to the right person. Mike and Pafan's story was about crossing oceans, literal oceans, for the chance at something real. Brett and Tiffany's story is about something different. something quieter but no less powerful. Their story is about what happens when two good people find each other and choose, every single day, to be good to each other. There are no villains in this book, no betrayals, no lies that nearly destroyed everything, no dramatic confrontation that left everyone questioning whether they'd survive. Brett and Tiffany's story is a love story without a crisis, and that's exactly what makes it extraordinary. Because the world is full of crisis love stories, reality TV thrives on them. We love the drama, the tears, the will they won't they, the altar rejection, the lie that unravels everything. We're conditioned to believe that love has to be tested by fire to be proven real. But Brett and Tiffany prove something else. They prove that love can be tested by the mundane, by the daily, repetitive, unglamorous act of showing up, and be just as real. They prove that you don't need a villain to have a love story. You just need two people with intention, communication, and the willingness to choose each other when the cameras stop rolling and the world stops watching. A therapist who analyzed their season called them the best couple in love is blind history. She spent an entire video cataloging their green flags. The way Brett asked, "May I join you?" before sitting on the couch. The way Tiffany said your reservations are valid without trying to fix his grief. The way they discussed finances without a single raised voice. The way they navigated stress as a team instead of as opponents. Green flags. That's what Brett and Tiffany are, a masterclass in green flags. And in a world that's obsessed with identifying red ones, maybe that's exactly the story we need. A man who designs shoes and writes screenplays in silence. A woman who dances bachata and wakes up singing. A couple who moved to Portland, bought a house in Beaverton, built a community, traveled the world, and still can't agree on what kind of dog to get. They toasted to now and forever, and I believe them. Because I've seen the footage, and I've read the interviews, and I've listened to the podcasts, and I've watched the way they talk about each other. Not performing, not selling, just being. Two people in love who were brave enough to find each other through a wall, and smart enough to keep finding each other every day after. That's what Books by Barron is for, to tell these stories, to give them permanence, to say to couples like Brett and Tiffany, your love matters. Not because it was dramatic, because it was real. This is the third book in the Books by Barron Love, his blind series. A.D. and Ollie were first. Mike and Pafan were second. Brett and Tiffany are third. And there will be more, because the mission doesn't stop. As long as there are couples finding their person on that show, there will be somebody willing to write their story the way they lived it, not the way somebody else edited it. I come from a long line of storytellers who didn't always get to tell their own stories, grandmothers who held whole family histories in a single recipe, uncles who taught entire worldviews in the punchline of a joke, preachers and barbers, aunties and cousins. The way stories get passed down in families like mine is oral, familial, particular. It's not always on the page. That's part of why the page matters. Because what doesn't get written down can get lost, and what gets lost takes a piece of us with it. I'm writing these books down on purpose. I'm putting them on a shelf on purpose, so that 20, 30, 50 years from now, somebody can pick this up and know they were here. They loved like this. They chose each other like this. The cameras lied sometimes. the books won't. To Brett and Tiffany, thank you for trusting me with your story. I hope I've done it justice. And to everyone reading who's ever wondered whether a quiet, steady, intentional love is enough. It is. It's more than enough. It's everything.